Ladies and gentlemen, it is your friend, Mike Brady from Ocean Liner Designs. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks so much for joining us. Happy Sunday night, Monday morning, depending on where you are. I am joined with me, and you can already see him on screen, but down in the corner there is our good friend, Dr. Stephen Payne. Stephen, welcome back.
Hello, Mike. Great to be back. Hello, everybody.
Good to have you with us, my friend. It's been a couple of weeks since we did our last live stream, and suffice it to say, the reaction was very positive. People really enjoyed hearing what you had to say. So thanks so much for coming back and joining us again. It's really good to have you here. I think so. Just to recap, last time we caught up, we were talking about the Queen Mary, and we made it as far as Queen Elizabeth because I'd warned that it would be a long a long discussion because there was a lot to talk through, but I think we did a fine job. I think we kind of made it work with the Queen Elizabeth. It kind of leads into the story that we're going to tell a little bit today. Did you ever see the Queen Elizabeth in person?
No, I've seen Queen Mary in Long Beach. I was born in 1960, so I would have been 7 and 8, and never saw the ships in this country. Sadly, never saw Queen Elizabeth.
That's tragic. Yeah, it was gone really too soon because she... what year did she burn? Was it
72?
72.
72. But as we'll learn in this presentation, she was due to remain with Cunard until 75 at least. So she would have been working in tandem with QE2 for, 5-6 years.
That would have been a remarkable outcome.
Yeah.
People are saying my volume is a little bit too low, which is interesting because my microphone is all the way up. I think I'm having a little issue with my mic, but what I'll do is I'll put it here so that I can speak directly down the barrel so that you can all hear me. Is that a little bit better? Let me know. I'm probably blowing Stephen's ears off by doing this, but so long as
you're fine.
So long as the audience can hear me, then we're okay. Is that better, guys? Let me know. Sorry about that. I'm gonna have to fiddle around with this. The old saying goes that it's not an Ocean Liner Designs live stream unless something goes horribly wrong at some point. Inevitably, there's some kind of technical issue. But it is great to have you back. And looking forward to seeing you later this year because we're both going to be on a voyage together. We
are. A proper voyage, a transatlantic crossing.
A proper voyage. That's right. Cunard's 185th anniversary. Your book to speak, which is great.
Yeah.
Will you be giving? Do you know? Can you give us a hint of kind of what's on the program? What you'll be covering?
Well, I always like doing Titanic first because that gets people interested, draws people in, and then I plan to do Lusitania, Mauritania, and then there's the Royal Yacht Britannia. I do that and why that was so special, and then finishing with Genesis of the Queen, the famous Red Dot lecture, which you've already seen, Mike, but perhaps when we do a third podcast, we'll do that next time.
That'd be brilliant. Why is it called the Red Dot lecture?
Well, that's rather giving the game away.
Okay, well, if people are curious as to why it's called the Red Dot Lecture, book a voyage with Cunard today. See your local agent. This accidentally turned into a Cunard ad. That's super exciting. Yeah, that'll be great, and I can't wait to see it. I saw the Red Dot Lecture in Red Hill, so everything's red.
That's right.
We had a.
Well, you remember it starts with people on a ship seeing a red dot. That's the start of the lecture, and all my friends poke fun of me saying it's the Red Dot Lecture. So.
I was wondering. That's really funny. We don't want to give the game away. Edwin Massey says I was going to ask that. Well, now Edwin, you're going to have to come on the voyage. Thomas Hyfer says Hi, Mike and Steve. Looking forward to this, plus reminiscing about growing up sailing on QE2. My childhood dream to become a deck officer started 20 years ago when first visiting her bridge as we sailed at nearly 28.5 knots. Hi, Thomas. Good to see you, mate. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thomas and his father took a lot of really beautiful photographs of the QE2. So
I remember meeting Thomas as a young lad, and of course, he's all grown up now.
yeah, now he's serving on ships and doing the whole thing. So yeah, it's pretty cool to see people actually getting involved in the industry. You know what I mean? Going away to sea and working on ships.
That's right.
So
That's right.
today we've got a special presentation which you've put together for us. So I don't think any introduction is needed. I think this is a very compelling list of accomplishments on the screen already, but I think we could just roll straight into it. So, Stephen, it's your presentation. Please take the floor.
Okay. Well, by way of
QE2.
introduction, this is a presentation that I started giving on board Queen Elizabeth II when she was in service. Obviously, it's adapted a bit. I presented it at the Southampton Queen Elizabeth terminal the year the ship was taken out of Cunard service. And I do the lecture occasionally on Queen Mary II crossing the Atlantic. So I thought it would be appropriate. So Mike, if we can have the next slide. So my association with QE2 began in June of 1969. And there you see me standing next to my mother and two of my three younger brothers. And we're standing just behind the mast. And the area of white bulwark that you see behind us was originally an open well where there was a sports deck on the original QE2. So whilst we were standing there on that top deck, the United States steamed in on one of her last trips. So amazing day. And the Andes was in port as well, preparing to sail on a cruise. So real strong memories. And of course, for somebody who already at that age wanted to design and build passenger ships, it was a tremendous day.
Yeah, it would have been
so
infectious.
Let's start the lecture proper, if we can move on. So 1969, Cunard introduced the Queen Elizabeth II. Everybody said that she would be the last transatlantic liner. And Cunard's sort of marketing push was that ships had been boring long enough. And they wanted QE2 to be totally new, totally radical. They didn't want to hark on their past. So almost everything on board the ship was totally different to what had gone before. And there was very little heritage or throwback to the previous Cunard ships. So somewhat the way Queen Anne is presented now by Cunard. So move on, Mike. So this is her as originally delivered, sleek, very modern. The stylized mast and funnel and everything. And you can't see it here, but the promenade deck, the superstructure's painted a khaki color, as it is below the bridge. And the idea is it's to make it look as though the lifeboats are suspended in midair. That was James Gardner's idea, who was the external stylist for the ship.
Brilliant.
So we move on, Mike.
Beautiful looking ship.
Yeah. So this is a view from the aft, and you see the terraced pools there, one for the first class, one for the tourist class. You can see some of the khaki colouring there on the aft superstructure, and you can see ahead up to the mast, and behind the mast is that area where there was the sports deck with the well opening. So that's where we were standing in that picture.
Brilliant. There's a lot here throwing back to the first Queens, right? That kind of like tiered terraced after deck as it like sprawls out of this beautiful vista. Do you think they borrowed a lot from the original Queen Elizabeth in designing this ship, or was this just now an established norm for
It
passenger
was
liners?
now an established norm, and also when you think of the stresses in a ship and crossing the Atlantic, you haven't got a lot of buoyancy at the bow or the stern because the shape of the ship, obviously you haven't got much buoyancy there because you've got to put the propellers, and so with little buoyancy it makes sense to tier the decks, otherwise you overload it and you cause stresses in the ship.
Right.
And that is one of the fundamental differences between a cruise ship and a liner, and why a liner, when you're like crossing the Atlantic, it is such an important prerequisite.
Amazing.
Okay, so QE2, before her, of course, Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth. There were two match ships, first proposed in 1926, across the Atlantic on a 5-day schedule, 28.5 knots. Not sister ships. They were radically different. Next one, Mike. And so here we see Queen Mary that we spoke about the previous lecture. And again, and there's the Elizabeth.
Mighty Queen Elizabeth. Beautiful.
Yeah, Elizabeth. This is actually her leaving New York for the last time. And you can see her paying off pennant flying behind the aft funnel there.
Wow.
And of course, they used to cross the Atlantic, one going westbound, one going east. They used to cross in mid-Atlantic. And this was the last time the two queens crossed on September the 25th, 1967. The Mary had already been sold to the city of Long Beach. The Elizabeth would have one more year in service before she too would be withdrawn. As we've said earlier, the original plan was to keep the Elizabeth in service for another few years to 1975. But such was the high operating costs of the Queens that it just wasn't possible.
Right.
So 1957, halcyon days, more passengers than ever were crossing the Atlantic by sea and air. And Cunard had 10 liners which were sailing full. And they also had the Coronia, which was extremely popular, sailing on luxury cruises around the world. But something happened. And that big thing was the introduction of the 707, which was able to cross the Atlantic at speed. Instead of 5 days across the Atlantic, you could do it in 8 or 9 hours. And Cunard originally thought that this would be a fad, that it wouldn't be popular, and that their business wouldn't suffer. Now, at the time, the Cunard chairman was Sir John Brocklebank, and he was looking at the future requirements for Cunard. And Queen Mary was aging quite quickly, and so they were already looking in the late 50s at a replacement that would enter service in the early 1960s. And they came up with the idea for a third Queen, the Q3, and she would be a conventional transatlantic liner with very little provision for cruising, very much like the France of the French line.
A beautiful ship.
Yeah.
What a stunning silhouette. It almost, there's a little bit of Coronia in there, I think.
Yes, yeah, there's that absolutely. The funnel looks very much like Coronia.
Mm.
And then as time went on, the silhouette became more and more radical. The funnel was dispensed with. Something of akin here, these funnels look like the funnels of Rotterdam,
Yeah,
actually.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, even that deck house, the whole thing, it's very interesting.
Yeah,
Very
that's right.
similar.
That's right.
Mm.
So work progressed on that. They got government loan to build it, and they were talking to various shipyards, Swan Hunter and John Brown's, Harland and Wolff and the like. And then the financial situation of Cunard was becoming more and more perilous. And on the 19th of October 1961, Q3 was abandoned. The reason being that the shareholders started to revolt because it was seen by them that a ship that would only be able to go on the Atlantic and wouldn't be suitable for cruising. And at this time, very few people were traveling in the off season, the winter months, across the Atlantic by ship. And the shareholder revolt forced Cunard to think again.
In retrospect, probably the right call.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah, Cunard would have been finished if they had built Q3, most definitely. Just like French Line were.
Mm.
And so a new ship was devised, one that would be much, much more efficient, would only have one main engine room, so half the power plant of the previous Queens. It would be of a size to enable it to go through the Panama Canal using aluminium in the superstructure. 58,000 tons as opposed to the 80 odd thousand of the other Queens. And she was designed to travel at 28.5 knots on two 6-bladed propellers, steam turbines, but she would also be able to operate as a cruise ship in the winter months.
Mm.
And she was dubbed Q4. And in 1962, June 1962, at the shareholders' meeting, John Brucklebank announced that Cunard had lost 1.7 million during the previous financial year, which at that, all those years ago, 1.7 million was a huge amount of money. So the pressure was mounting on Cunard and what they would have to do.
But this was very much an issue, like an industry-wide issue, right? Because I can't imagine that this was purely Cunard's problem.
No, United States at that time had just gone from being a profitable enterprise to a loss-making. So her transatlantics were loss-making. I believe the France, which entered service in 1962, had several years of profitable operation, but certainly by the late 1960s, she was running at a loss. And in 1973, she lost about 12 million, which was subsidized by the French government.
I think that's an interesting example of what might have happened if Cunard had gone down the Q3 path, because you've
Yeah.
essentially got. But the irony being, France goes on to become a beloved cruise ship. That's a story for another day.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's it. That's it. And so Cunard was able to get a loan from the government, £17.6 million at a 4.5% interest rate. But it's interesting that the government put various conditions on the loan, and one of the conditions was that the ship had to be a 3-class ship. So it had to be first, second, and third class, or whatever you designate the different classes. But essentially, a 3-class ship was mandated by the government. Why the government should dictate to a business what, but that was one of the conditions of the loan.
Interesting.
And Cunard went out with this new design, huge specification, Camel Aids, Fairfields, Klein, John Brown at Clydebank, Swan Hunter, and Harland and Wolff all tendered, but in the end it was John Brown's who got the deal for 25.4 million, with delivery set for May 1968.
Interesting. Also continuing that great working relationship between Cunard and John Brown going
John
back
Brown,
to the 19th century.
absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. And in November 1965, Sir John Brocklebank resigned, and his place was taken by an absolutely fantastic leader of Cunard, Sir Basil Smallpiece. And Sir Basil came from the airline industry, and he radically shook up Cunard, and without him, we wouldn't have had a Cunard today, most definitely. Because by the mid-half of 1965, the company had already lost over 1 million, more than a million than they did in 1964. And this is only half-yearly results. And the loss was entirely attributable to the passenger shipping. And it was originally offset by the cargo ships. But as the passenger ship losses got more and more, the cargo ships just couldn't keep pace. And so Cunard was running at a big deficit. But Cunard still had faith in the Queen Elizabeth. And so they spent 1.5 million in 1965-66 to provide her with another 10 years of service. And they completely air-conditioned the ship, which was a huge undertaking. They increased the water distillation plant to create more water for baths and showers. There was a new stern Lido installed, and they redecorated some of the public rooms, which to my mind wasn't always a big success, but that's a matter of taste.
That was very diplomatic.
So here we see the new Lido with the swimming pool added to the aft end of the Queen Elizabeth. And
there's something so funny about this because it is so eras clashing. Like you see this, you know, the old docking bridge that you could have found on an ocean liner from the 1910s, the poop covered in, you know, winches and all kinds of stuff, bits of equipment and capstans, and then above it just this beautiful sprawling swimming pool deck. It's so it is really, you forget that these ships were in service so long, you know, 30 years. That's a long time. A lot changed from when she was introduced until the 60s and 70s. That's really amazing.
That's right. And with her air conditioning, of course, she could go on tropical cruises and have the passengers in comfortable conditions, whereas Queen Mary, with largely just ventilation rather than air conditioning, the conditions on board could get very hot and sticky.
Yeah, I was going to say that would have been a change quite a number of GI veterans would have appreciated about 20 years earlier.
Absolutely. Well, when you think these ships carried, 12,000 troops on those voyages, but most of them, of course, across the Atlantic where it wasn't so hot. So here we see, in fact, that should say Q4, not Q3. That's the keel laying of Q4, which would become Queen Elizabeth II, 2nd of July 1965. The same slipway where the previous queens were built, and the Lusitania and the Aquitania.
It's really sweet to see that. I love that they've maintained this continuity between, you know, having their ships built at John Brown. That is very heartening.
And by spring 1966, you see the amount of progress made there. Incidentally, sadly, this site is now a technical college, no longer a shipyard there, but you can see the very end of the slipway where it enters the Clyde. That's marked still there, but it's very sad to go there. And the only thing that actually exists in that photograph now is the large hammerhead crane there in the background. That's the only part of the yard that still exists.
Really?
Yeah.
Why did that survive? That's interesting.
Well, it's used as a tourist attraction, and you
Right.
can go up and walk along the top deck there.
Not me. I'm
So,
afraid of heights, so you won't catch me up there. But
so here we are looking down. The keel is still being produced, and some of the bulkheads are being erected. You can see the double bottom there, the structure as work is progressing, and all this part of the ship would have been constructed of steel.
and so was this was all welded?
Yes, no riveting at all.
Wow.
No. Now, one of the things that really caused a lot of problems for passenger shipping, especially British passenger shipping, was the 7-week seaman strike in 1966. And Cunard lost over 3.5 million in that period. And also the cargo ships were now starting to run with a loss. Passenger ships were losing 7.5 million. So a colossal, very difficult time. And Cunard was really in a fight for survival. And Cunard couldn't keep up the payments for the QE2, even with the loan they had. And so they had to withdraw the ships that were running at a deficit and basically sell them to raise money to pay for the continuing building of QE2. And so we see Coronia, Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, Corinthia, and Sylvania all left Cunard service in the period after 1966, with only Franconia and Carmania remaining in service.
It's a real changing of the guard moment, isn't it?
Yeah. And it was Basil Smallpiece who directed this, and you can say he really cut Cunard down, but it was the only thing he could do. Without him doing that, as I say, Cunard wouldn't exist today.
I think people get very nostalgic, very attached to these ships, and people always ask, why didn't they save Olympic? Why didn't they save Mauritania? And at the end of the day, they're built as a commercial venture, and they have to commercially make sense.
Their money, and and as we know from the few ships that are preserved, like the original Queen Mary, the QE2, and the Rotterdam, they are very expensive to maintain. A ship really needs a huge amount of money, even if it's alongside acting as a hotel.
Yeah. Pause for comment. Oh, well, that was perfect time to pause for comment because we were already commenting. I did want to give a quick shout out.
I shall have a quick sip.
Yeah, go on. I've been sipping my coffee glued to the screen. Very interesting stuff. A very big thank you to Brandon Meyer, who has left a very, very fine comment with a nice donation to the channel's upkeep, $50. He says, without listening to the whole talk, it's hard to have a question. So I'll just say a huge thanks to Mike for hosting this, his team for getting it running, and a Queen Mary 2 size thank you. That is a 150,000 ton thank you to Stephen Payne for taking time out of his day to talk to us sea nerds. Thank you, Brandon.
Well, thank you.
It's very, very sweet. Yeah, it's there was actually people talking a little earlier, I noticed in the comments, about the naming convention of these ships. So at this point, I think she was still just known as Q4, and there was a lot of conjecture around the name. But was there thought given to bringing back the Aenia names? I mean, Franconia, Carmania, that old Cunard convention?
No. Cunard had set on calling her. There is a controversy over the naming, whether or not it was just Queen Elizabeth. But when the Queen stepped up and named the ship, she said Queen Elizabeth II. And so you have the two at the end.
In effect, naming it after herself by accident.
Well, no, because it's an Arabic two rather than the Roman two that she had.
Very interesting.
So it's the second ship to be called Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah. But then what I think I'm getting at is that instead of saying Queen Elizabeth II and saying that, indicating that it was the second Queen Elizabeth, by saying Queen Elizabeth II, it's interesting that maybe like reading it off the page, she was kind of referring to it as you would refer to a monarch by saying Queen Elizabeth II. Like you wouldn't say, oh, I'm boarding Queen Mary II in July this year. No, it is the second Queen Mary. No, very interesting discussion going on in the background around this. So people are curious about the idea of reusing, your Tanias, but I think that became more of a conversation around the time of Queen Mary too, right? There was like a little bit of a push for that.
Yep, Cunard certainly wanted to call her Mauritania, and they proposed that, but Mickey Harrison, who was the CEO of Carnival and chairman as well, he wanted Cunard to use the Queen nomenclature.
Again, probably the right call. I think we talked about this last time, but I find it so interesting what's in a name. You know what I mean? Like how it impacts the way people see the ship. Even though I would like to see another Mauritania at sea, personally.
Well, I'd like to see them painted Coronia green.
Oh yeah, April 1st, or maybe St. Patrick's Day next year. They could indulge us. Brilliant. So,
okay, so June 1967, we're 3 months before launching, and you see that the superstructure is now being erected. The superstructure that you see here is fabricated from aluminium, or aluminum for our American friends. And by doing that, they were able to add one more deck on the ship, with it still remaining stable. So that was all part of the economics of the ship. Nice atmospheric shot here as the ship is being prepared for launching.
Beautiful shot.
And then here we see, just prior to launching, tugs being made ready to take charge of the ship once she enters the water. But you see the rounded stern there, and under the waterline, you see where the propeller is. There's not a lot of ship there, and so there's not a lot of buoyancy. And as I say, that is one reason why, by having the tiered decks, you're not overstressing that part of the ship.
Interesting.
Here we are, nice aerial view, with the ship poised to be launched into the River Clyde.
I love that shot. This was all filmed in color for a newsreel, and if you look it up on YouTube, if you look up QE2 launch, Queen Elizabeth II launch, the scenes from this are amazing, because seeing it in color is pretty remarkable. In fact, I don't know that there were any other Cunard ship launches, traditional launches like this, instead of floating out, shot in color. I think this is that I can think of.
No, because it was one of the Saxonia class, wasn't it, in the late 50s, which was the one prior to that. So that's a full 10 years prior. So color wasn't in. We didn't have color telly in those days, and that. So
someone's just raised a good point. Sorry, I know this isn't discussion time, but I was curious about this as well. Alexandru Karjan asks, wasn't adding propellers before a launch usually not the done thing, because you could risk like damaging the shaft and they'd start spinning as they enter the water?
A lot of yards did have the propellers on.
Okay.
John Brown's invariably did. Swan Hunters certainly did. But also, the width of the Clyde here is very, very narrow, and a huge number of drag chains are needed to stop the ship from careering into the other side of the bank. And having the propellers on would also slow the ship down.
Oh, like drag, like having two parachutes on the back. Very interesting.
That's it. So that may be another reason.
It's clever. That's a beautiful shot.
Yeah, and you see she's angled that she will go up that inlet there, but nonetheless, they've got to bring her under control very quickly. And at the actual time of launch, there was a photograph posted on board the ship in one of the aft staircases, and it showed all the workmen at the launch, because they were given time off to actually go and watch. But from this overhead photograph taken from a helicopter, you could see several people walking out of the gate. And one of the guys that used to work at John Brown was one of my managers on Queen Mary 2 construction. And he said there was a witch hunt afterwards by the management of the yard to identify those people that had left, because they were deemed to have left work early.
That's like captured on film. That's hilarious.
That's it.
That's hilarious. It's like people who sneak off to concerts after calling in sick, and then they're captured by the TV camera.
That's right. That's right.
That's great. Someone's made a good comment. You can see how tight that is. Like, that is such a tight. But this is where some of the biggest ships of the 20th century were launched from.
Absolutely, and you think as well that a lot of the ships, like the previous Queens, had to leave the yard without their lifeboats because they had to be lightened as much as possible. QE2 had a draft of 32 feet. The old Queen's was about 40, and Queen Mary ran aground leaving the yard, and that's why they didn't have the lifeboats on that. But QE2 was a bit lighter, so but it is very tight.
Yeah,
and of course the classic shot of an ocean liner on that marvelous bow, harping on a bit, but Queen Mary 2's bow is developed from that shape, but it's about 3 decks higher and everything. So yeah.
So you used QE2's lines, is that right? As a base?
It was the starting point. Obviously Queen Mary 2 is a lot, as I say, it's 3 decks higher and a lot wider, but the general shape, because QE2 didn't suffer damage in the bow region, she suffered cracking damage up in the superstructure, but that's why I use that as the sort of initial template for Queen Mary 2.
Like, obviously, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, that's it. And when we hint do the Genesis lecture, the red dot lecture, Mike, you'll see a similar picture.
You're a great salesman, Stephen. Brilliant.
So here we see launch 20th of September, and I was a 7-year-old at that time, and I remember watching it on television. Actually, I remember that.
That's great.
Grainy black and white telly. Yeah.
Were you already ship obsessed by this point, or is this the kind of thing that was starting to?
Okay. Yeah, I from the age of 5, when I watched a program about the old Queen Elizabeth, that started me off. So
yeah.
And here we see the launching Queen there in the blue outfit. She's just launched the ship, and as we've said, named it Queen Elizabeth II.
Wow.
So here we are entering the water, and this is always deemed the most dangerous voyage a ship will make, because it's not fully supported by the water yet, and it's not fully supported on land. So it's sort of that mid point, and it's the point at which the ship is the most unstable because it hasn't got the proper stability from being fully immersed.
Mm.
And so it's always the point where you hope the ship's not going to topple over.
Mm.
And the tug's bringing around to the fitting out key, where all the great liners and even ships like the Hood were outfitted alongside that same spot.
So she really is the last of an era. And in fact, was she the last big passenger ship John Brown built?
Yes, she was.
So kind of
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Canberra to Harland and Wolff. It's all that
Yeah,
generation
very
of
much.
liners.
Very much.
There's a little bit of sadness attached to it. I mean, it's a beautiful accomplishment, but it really is the end of an era in some ways, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, the yard went bankrupt during the latter stages of construction, and a new consortium was formed, Upper Clyde Shipbuilders, which included John Brown. So she was sort of completed. But
wow.
yeah.
So
here we see her in the final stages of fitting out.
That green color, was that I noticed it at launch as well, but at launch, which presumably was quite a few months before this.
Protective paint for the aluminium.
So like a primer almost to the aluminium.
Okay,
cool.
That's
right.
it.
So I mean that's a great viewpoint then. So are we saying everything above the white line is aluminium?
That's right.
Wow, that's a lot of aluminium.
A lot of aluminium. Yeah. And even right from the very beginning, it caused problems of cracking with the ship flexing. Certainly, if you looked or walked along the ship at those big square windows, especially up forward, you would find doubler plates and constant remedial work to stop cracking. And there was a big internal staircase forward, the A staircase, which apparently was one of the big areas of where the ship cracked, and had to be constant remedial work done.
Wow.
So here we are fitting out one of the swimming pools, so that you see the swimming pool tank. And then after the steel work had been completed, then the wood deck would be laid. You can see the hammerhead crane there in the background.
Right,
that's
right.
The one that's still remaining at the yard.
Cool.
And of course, the funnel was also a big design conundrum. What would they do with the funnel? And Gardner, who was the consultant brought in to stylize the ship, wanted to radically change the funnel. But the primary or two primary functions of a funnel, first off, is to throw the smoke clear of the ship, obviously. And the second is to act as an advertisement for the shipping company. But he completely changed it by removing the red from the main body of the funnel and just fitting it in the wind scoop at the base. So completely changed. And then painting the boat deck side on the promenade this khaki color, and having the boats appear that they would be floating in midair, was all part of his idea, James Gardner, to modernize the outlook of the ship.
Very clever. Yeah, there's a couple of funnel shapes in there I recognize. Like that one right in the middle looks very much like Iberia's funnel.
Well, it's actually Arcadia. Because Arcadia
really?
was built by John Brown. Iberia was Harland and Wolff, and she had a slightly different funnel.
Yeah.
And Britannia, the Royal Yacht, had a very similar funnel.
Oh, there you go. It's such an elegant shape. I think that's my favorite funnel shape of all time.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. Great photo.
So this is a diagram of the workings of the wind scoop. You see the airflow goes into the scoop at the bottom, is thrown upwards, and it fills the sort of vacuum that's being formed behind the main body of the funnel. And if you don't fill that with air sufficiently, the smoke is drawn down onto the aft decks. And you see that the exhaust from the boiler room was also exhausted up near the top of the funnel. Those lines there you see are the exhaust from the engine room ventilation, and that's all being used to throw the smoke clear.
Wow. There it goes.
Here it is, the actual, the original funnel.
Fantastic.
And here we see it on its deck house. You can see how thin it was. And in fact, the thinner a funnel, the least it creates the vacuum behind it. So that's why funnels generally are normally quite thin, like that.
Right.
And then laying the wood deck in front of the shroud for that sunken sports deck where I was standing as a 7-year-old, 9-year-old rather. And you can see that on the aluminium deck, there's that black, and that's like tar that they put down first of all, and then the wood is bolted to the deck with various studs.
I don't think people realize that maybe there's so much steel underneath decking. I think people just, it seems so seamless that it's all wood, wood planked. But these aren't pirate ships. Everything's steel, and almost the teak now,
That's
of course,
right.
is being dispensed with
from Morro Castle.
Although we've been talking recently, some of my from Morro Castle. That's right. We've been looking at some ships like P&O's Strathnaver and some of the other liners from the 20s and 30s that were being built by Vickers,
Barrow.
Barrow. Yep. And what's interesting is some of these we noticed had big cutouts in the steel deck plating, and actually just had bare planks running the entire length of the promenade. So if you were standing on the deck below and you looked up, you would see wooden planks. And it's really interesting. Possibly a weight saving thing, because of course back then it was all steel, but some of these ships were very lightly built up top.
Yes.
But of course now, come QE2, this is all aluminium plating, presumably underfoot. So
yes.
the weight saving has already basically happened.
That's right. That's right.
The other thing is these are very thick. These planks, right? They're quite.
They are.
Quite dense.
They're I think 4 inches thick, something of that.
Wow.
So yeah, very thick, very heavy.
Very heavy.
And nowadays very difficult to source, because it had to be the highest quality without any knots and twists in it.
Yep.
Water sawn. Yeah.
Yep.
So here we see the bridge.
Wow.
Upside down. So it's constructed upside down. Again, all of aluminium. Yep.
Get it right side up. So they've built it upside down. Again, all made out of aluminium as one unit. And this is really interesting, because this is, again, like reminding me a lot of now design practices they're going to be using on ships like
very early stages of prefabrication.
Wow.
And there you see it being hoisted on board.
And there it goes.
So Thomas will remember going up there onto the bridge. And then also the mast was a radical departure from what had been done before.
Yeah, if anyone gets on Queen Mary 2 and is in the library, pick up Stephen, the brilliant book about how they built Queen Mary 2 that Stephen helped compile. The photographs are amazing, but I had a really surreal moment because there was a photograph of them winching the entire superstructure front, including the room that I was then sitting in, onto the ship. It was the first page I flipped to, and you look at the scale of everything around you and you think this was moved as one unit. That is really mind-blowing engineering. That is very impressive stuff.
Well, we lifted sections of 600 tons on the Mary, and that was in 2002. Now they're doing 1,200-ton lifts.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Yeah.
So when roughly would this shot have been taken? Because she's looking, we've got steam, it looks like, coming out of her, gases coming out.
This is very, very close to departure from the yard. Very close, because steam is up, all the lifeboats are in place, you can see. So yeah, very, very soon to depart. So this is around May 1968.
It's exciting. There's something about, although I can see a big hole for the radar mast.
No, there is that. That's actually the pit where the magnetic compass.
Ah, okay. So that sits in there, and then the mast was sat behind it. Is that right?
Sat behind it.
Right.
Yep.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's
you
funny.
You can see that sports deck there.
Yep. Where you posed on your voyage.
That's it. Because that, as we'll see, disappeared, and that's where they put the balcony cabins.
Right. Because again, like, this is a ship that had such a long career, which we are going to touch on momentarily. It's just got some comments from people. Folks have been making little donations and helping out with the channel. Thanks so much to Cedar Creek. I can't see the rest of your name, but Cedar Creek donated. Thank you very much for that. Ironic Doctor as well. Thank you very much for that. Natmay Port Midala says, hello there, watching this fascinating stream from Belfast. Nice to see you both. Thank you very much, Natmay. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I'm always put on the spot with pronunciations, and I do my best. But people finding this very interesting. I think the QE2 I've got a personal attachment to, even though I never went on it, because at the time that she used to visit Melbourne quite a bit, she would come in to Port Melbourne. Dad had a place right there on the waterfront, and we would see all the big ships coming in, and it was always really exciting when QE2 would come, because I was 6 or 7 and obsessed with the Titanic and ocean liners, and you see cruise ships come and go, painted white and blue, and then you see a black hulled ocean liner with the red funnel top, and it just it was just so exciting. It really felt like a celebrity was visiting, and I miss seeing her coming in. But as always, if ever there's a Queen Mary 2 comes to visit, I'll always be down to. It's like seeing an old friend, isn't it, in a weird way? Brilliant. Well, look, let's crack on, because I think now we begin to talk about how they're actually laying her out.
Yeah, and we get to talk about the interiors. So, as we said, the government stipulated it had to be a 3-class ship, but towards the end of the construction, Cunard asked the government whether or not they would agree to relax that condition and go to a 2-class, and the government eventually agreed. So the 1st-class areas remained as originally planned, but they combine the cabin and tourist classes into a new tourist, and it was called transatlantic class as well. And one of the most interesting things is that the main lounges for the cabin and tourist classes were above each other, or one above the other, and what they did was they basically cut a hole in the middle to create a 2-deck high lounge in the new scheme of things, which was called the double room. The lower part of it was the double down, which would have been the tourist class lounge, and the double up would have been the cabin class, but combined. It was decorated through John Bannenberg, who was the yacht designer, and we'll see that in a minute. One of the most confusing things, though, on QE2, and people say Queen Mary 2 is confusing, but QE2, believe me, was far more confusing, was that there were staircases that only went up through some of the decks to serve the 3 individual classes. And it was too late in the construction to extend them to cover the new 2-class configuration. So there was a very odd staircase configuration of the ship throughout its whole career.
Well, it's a funny one though, because it is very much like having segregated classes. It's difficult because you'll have stairs missing whole decks, right? Versus on Rotterdam, where it had been designed for easy conversion. So you had this clever system of essentially like deployable panels that will come out, and you can then have a 1-class or 2-class depending, right?
Yeah, well, you've got that sort of staircase which is wrapped round each other, and you can emerge on each deck if the partitions are open or closed, depending if it's open class or a 2-class ship. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't blame Cunard or John Brown too much for that confusion element, because first of all, the government had stipulated they wanted this 3-class or 2 arrangement, but also it's just kind of the way ships had always been built. Like for example, on Titanic, there was no way to get from the aft well deck up to the boat deck at all. There were no ladders. There was nothing. So it's just we think of these things as like one continuous interior, but you could go a whole voyage and not see 2/3 of the ship because it was outside of your class range.
It's analogous to going on a ship today and you never see the crew accommodation.
Yeah. Yep, it exists, but in another world.
It exists. There's the whole new other world down below that with all the crew messes, the crew cabins, and the crew lounges. Yeah.
Very interesting, that. Ooh.
So this is the double room. This is the
Plush.
double down, and you see the well opening there to the left with the spiral staircase. The spiral staircase was at the aft end of the room. And yeah, there's this red, predominantly red color scheme here. Very attractive room.
It's beautiful. It looks very comfortable, very plush.
Social area for the tourist class passengers. Yeah. Another view there. You see the staircase now. We're now looking forward. Huge dance floor there, and a very small circular bandstand right at the forward end. You can just see a musician standing there in that small alcove at the forward end of the room. So this is the original configuration before any changes were made. And then up forward, this is the Britannia restaurant, enormous restaurant, the main body there. Right at the forward end of the deck was the 1st-class lookout. And then you've got that staircase with the 3 lifts. That staircase is the A staircase, the one that was prone to the cracking. But then you've got this huge restaurant, which was the tourist class restaurant. And in that area on the center line, you see the revolving doors for the waiters to come in and out. There were then escalators down to the main galley, which was below.
Wow. Question about this. So curious decision to have the stairs so that instead of facing forward, they're actually facing to port. Was that difficult for passengers? If the ship was rolling, it would surely throw you forward down the stairs.
Well, you're not allowed to do it today.
Yeah.
You've got to have 4 and a half stairs, but some other ships had similar stairs to that. I've seen it before. I'm trying to think of other ships that had a similar arrangement. I've certainly seen it before. But yeah, these stairs were on various landings as you went round. Yeah.
Yep.
So this is the first class lookout right at the forward end, which was not a popular space because one problem with the QE2 is that she did, as we'll see towards the end of the lecture, she did pitch rather a lot. So the bow would move up and down a lot, and being in this room with the pitching could make you feel quite queasy very quickly.
Yeah. Anyone who's been seasick knows what that feels like.
Yeah. So this is the very forward end of it.
Is that a jukebox?
No, I think it's a navigational display, which like a repeater from the radar, I think, something like that. And I think there's a compass there.
Cool.
And this is the Britannia restaurant, which was aft of it, the tourist. And I remember on that visit in May 69 or June 69, rather, I remember this very, very well. And that's certainly that figurehead of Britannia. I remember that there. And the very bright colours, the red and white chairs.
Was that the
Very
actual
striking.
figurehead from Britannia?
No,
Okay, so
no, it was made, as far as I know, for QE2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another view of the restaurant. So completely different from the previous queens that had gone before. Leather used in the seating and chrome, a lot of chrome, aluminium, and not so much wood paneling as on the previous ships. And this is the first class dining room, which was Columbia, which was on the deck below. It was aft of the main galley space.
Mm-hmm. Just completely different color palette, but
Yeah.
quite attractive. I think people now try to copy this look.
Yep, this is the tourist bar called the Theatre Bar because further forward from this space was where the theatre was. And later in life, this area was transformed into the midships bar.
Okay.
No, the chart room. Sorry, chart room, not
Chart room.
midships bar, chart room. And we'll see a photo of that in a minute.
Great.
So this is the midship bar. This is the first class bar, which was aft of their Columbia restaurant. Green suede. I remember on one of the early voyages I did on QE2, this was still intact.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. It's so of the era. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. Queen's room that we see here. So and the original furniture which echoed the trumpet columns there of the holding the ceiling up, and the slots in the deck head which had coloured lights in. So this is the first class main lounge.
As built, was it called the Queen's Room, or was that something that was introduced? So
no, always called the Queen's Room.
Wow, so this is really setting precedents for the entire future Cunard fleet in a way,
Yeah,
right?
no, absolutely. Yeah. That's it at night, and you see the coloured lights in the deck head.
Cool.
Yeah, it was a very attractive room, actually.
Yeah, very unique.
And one of the nightclubs, I think this is the 736 Club, if I remember right, which was up forward. And she had a grill room, which was called the Princess Grill. and it wasn't assigned to cabins like it is now. It was where you paid an extra tariff, and so it's very much like the veranda grill that's on the old Queen's on that. But this is one of the few rooms that actually stayed almost original throughout the ship's whole career. So this is one of the shops.
Did she have it as comprehensive a shopping setup as?
Yep, and we'll see that in a minute.
Great.
Yep, and the outside, one of the outside pool decks there, and you can see the khaki color has been used on the inside of the where the screens are.
Interesting. It's funny seeing something so recognizably modern, and this ship could almost be at sea today, in front of the ocean terminal at Southampton, which is long gone. It's so bizarre.
Well, I actually saw that being demolished, because that was being demolished while I was at university doing my naval architecture studies. And in those days, you could just walk into the docks. There wasn't all the security there is now. And I went down, and they were demolishing the end there where the flag is flying. They were demolishing that part of it. Very sad to see it go.
Heartbreaking. Yeah, I can't talk about that. It makes me choke up.
Yeah. And so the cabin struck a very modern tone, first class cabin here. And even the tourist class, although you've got bunk beds, they're all en suite. All the cabins were en suite, fully air conditioned. And that was the main difference between the first and tourists, was the amount of space allocated to each passenger.
Okay. Pretty sure I saw this room set up at IKEA this weekend, just gone. Pause for comment. Yeah, it's really interesting that she's so utterly groundbreaking for Cunard, because nothing like this had ever been built for them. Like you said, everything had been timber paneled and very classic. We got a fun comment from Thomas Heifer. He said, "A stairway was and still is my favorite on board. In rough weather, it was sometimes possible to jump up multiple steps as she pitched just right." Which is hilarious. I'm flying. Thomas also said that QE2's bridge was nicknamed the Tank thanks to its small size compared to her overall size. A ship I work on, this is Thomas, a ship I work on is around 3.5 times smaller in volume, but has a bigger bridge for perspective. So not much real estate given to the officers of the watch. Something that the Queen Mary 2 certainly doesn't suffer from, because I got to visit that on the behind the scenes tour, and that is like one of the finest offices in the world. It is just the best view. And Captain Hashmi, who was showing us around, is really funny, because he, standing on the bridge wing where you've got essentially the controls for maneuvering the ship coming into dock and coming into port and things like that. He talks about it like he's parking a Prius. Like he's just kind of like looking over his shoulder, because you've got that great view right down the entire length of the ship, because she has those huge wings that stick out of the sides. Absolutely fantastic. Just a big bridge. Are there guidelines around the size of a bridge? Is it just something that you kind of have to?
There are regulations for visibility from it and things like that. Yeah, very much.
Yeah, interesting. But as far as like floor space for the crew, was it up to you? Were you just essentially making?
Yeah, no, it was up to me. Me.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm really glad to see these photographs of QE2, because again, I never went on board, so I can't compare then and now, unfortunately. But it's very interesting to see her as she was. Let's pick up the story. So
so here we are preparing to leave John Brown's full of anticipation. She's already severely late. There were construction delays, materials and everything. So Cunard were hoping to get her into service for the summer season of 1968. So she's late leaving the yard, and then as we see, she'll leave.
Oh yeah, next. Actually, can I just ask real quick? Sorry, one other
Yep.
question. I know I should have saved this for the discussion pause, but I know I'll forget. QE2 is fitted with a auxiliary anchor, or a big central anchor rather, with two
Yep.
either side. So I know that years back in the 1910s and 20s, border trade regulations were that you had two anchors forward and at least one big auxiliary. Was that still the case with QE2? And then was that eventually, at what stage, I guess, was that dropped? Because I know that ships nowadays, they're being built with two main anchors, right? And that's about it.
Well, that center anchor that you see there on the stem didn't last very long on QE2.
Ah.
And the reason was, with the ship pitching, the force of the water used to jam the anchor up into the hawse pipe and actually damage the stem. And so they removed it and plated the opening over, and it was carried on the forecastle.
Okay.
Which is what we do on Queen Mary 2. We don't have the center anchor. We carry it on board as a spare.
Right. Very interesting. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that.
So here she is. It's now November 1968. Remember, she should have been in service in May. It's now November. She's leaving the yard, cautiously going down the Clyde to the open sea.
Very cautiously.
Very cautiously. Yep.
Wow. So it was on a very similar voyage such as this out that Queen Mary got grounded, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she had exactly the same voyage. So did the Elizabeth, and yep,
very delicate operation.
Yep. And here we see Prince Charles, who's now obviously King Charles, the ship's first master, who was Bill Warwick, who was the father of Ron Warwick, who took command of the ship later in her career and was the first captain of Queen Mary 2. And there also is Sir Basil Smallpiece.
So big.
And they're on the bridge wing, and you can see the funnel behind them.
Oh yeah, right. It does look very thin there, doesn't it?
Yeah. And here she is on sea trials. Everything initially going very well, and she looks the splendid, sleek, and modern ship that she was designed to be. And you can see James Gardner's idea of the lifeboats hanging in thin air because of the dark colouring of the boat deck, bulwark or bulkhead rather, behind the boats.
Brilliant.
And the davits were painted black as well, rather than the traditional white.
You'll also see how far that smoke is clearing the decks as well as it's lifted up. Brilliant.
Yeah. Nice head-on shot. And I must admit, I wrote to Cunard in the very early, I must have been about 11 at the time, and they sent me these photos.
Oh, fantastic. That's awesome.
Yeah. And you can, that's another nice thing, showing the boats hanging. Oh, so sea trials off the Isle of Arran.
Did you want to make a point about this photo?
I was just going to say, you can see as well, the bridge is got the car key beneath it as well to make it as if the bridge is hanging in space there. That was the idea.
Yep.
And the windows there, the small windows of the superstructure, you've got where the car key is the captain's cabin. Below that, the small windows is the officer's wardroom. and bar space. And below that, the large rectangular windows are that first-class lookout.
Yep. So even at this stage, crew quarters are commanding some of the best real estate on the ship, which is not something that would last too much longer.
I certainly couldn't do that with Queen Mary 2.
Yeah.
No, I would have been laughed out of the office if I'd done that.
Yeah. That's a great shot. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Long, low, and sleek.
Yeah. There's something very pleasing about seeing the early sketches and then seeing this thing, made out of iron and steel and aluminium. That's funny. That was like I just defaulted to that quote from Titanic. She's made out of iron, made out of steel and aluminium, and willed into reality. And there she is. And it's exactly as really a lot of Q3 is in QE2. A lot of they had already kind of, to my mind, mapped out what they wanted this ship to look like, and then
and also when they refitted two of the Cunard ships for cruising, Franconia and Carmania, they trialed various things in the passenger accommodation that would be used on QE2. So that was, those refits were done in the mid-60s. So various arrangements of cabin spaces and wet rooms, bathrooms and that were trialed for doing on QE2.
Yeah, so they're really doing their testing early on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, what a shot.
Yeah, so she's turning around. Yeah.
Very little bow wave as well, by the looks of it.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. But there were big problems. Oil contaminated the boiler feed water, which meant that the trials had to be stopped, because once oil gets into the main water in the boiler, if you don't sort it out, you can ruin the boiler. And then further trials were conducted between the 17th and the 20th of December, successfully completed, with the ship attaining 32.46 knots. And then she left again on her acceptance trials, 23rd of December, with a call at Las Palmas. There were some areas of the accommodation still not complete. And one of the things that really plagued the outfitting of the ship was that a lot of the copper pipe work was being requisitioned by the crew. So it would be installed, and then people from the shipyard, rather, not the crew, people on the shipyard would then go and remove it and sell it. A lot of the carpet went missing. People said that you could find more of QE2's carpet in the housing estates around John Brown's than there was actually on board the ship. So
yikes. Yeah, it was a pretty dire time for Britain as well.
It was. Really, and I think as well, with the yard teetering on bankruptcy on that, I think people felt they just wanted to get as much as they could before it all collapsed.
Yeah, very sad.
Yeah. So the big problem was that on that acceptance trip, they found terrible vibration within the main steam turbines, and she limped back to Southampton from her proving cruise, arriving in Southampton on the 2nd of January 1969. She moored up against the ocean terminal, and Cunard announced that they were refusing to accept the ship.
Wow. It wouldn't be a John Brown built ocean liner without serious vibration issues at some point early in its career almost. That seems to be the tradition.
So here she is, ocean terminal, great ship, but with a big mechanical problem within her main turbines.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the problem. Here we see the turbine rotor, and unfortunately at certain speeds, the turbine blades that you see here started to vibrate and then actually broke off. And you can see that the third rotor there from the left, you see there are gaps in the turbine blades where they've actually broken off.
Not
and
cool.
I actually have a turbine blade from one of these turbines in my living. In fact, you can see behind, there's the QE2 picture, and below it on the wood is a turbine blade from QE2 that I was given by the widow of a chief engineer, and that was presented to him when the ship was re-engined. And when the chief died, his widow called me up and said, "Oh, I want you to have that memento of QE2." So that's there.
Wow, what a great thing to have. That's brilliant. Presumably not one of the ones that snapped off.
No. So, yeah, Ginard refused to accept it until it was fixed. And then there was, after work had been done, there was new trials, and then a further voyage, and then finally Cunard accept the ship on the 18th of April, 1969. So she was a year late from what they had originally hoped to have the ship.
Wow.
And here she is, all ready for a maiden voyage. Cunard flag finally flying from the forward jack there.
Yeah, really space age in comparison to what had come before. By comparison, she's a pretty remarkable looking ship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you recognize the flag flying from her radar mast? Almost looks like a iron cross.
Yeah, it's a cross of, so no idea. It may be some organization that was on board or something. It's not, doesn't come across as a regular flag.
No, it's almost like the Maltese cross or something. Maybe someone in the comments will be able to help us out. Interesting.
Yeah. So this is a cutaway drawing that was put out at the time. So nice drawing. So that's the forward end, and the next slide is the aft end. And she was very unusual in many respects. One was that the dining rooms were right forward and they were high up in the ship, whereas on a lot of ships they were low down in the ship and usually further aft.
Yeah, was there any particular reason for that, or it was just
it was sense? Just what they decided to do, but it's not an experiment that's been repeated very often. Mostly because you feel the motion more up forward. And you think, when I came to design Queen Mary 2, the first public space that I set was the main dining room, and that I positioned 2/3 aft because it was at the point of least motion.
The other effect of having the dining saloon where you've got it on Queen Mary 2 is that being relatively low down and seeing the water going past so quickly is, for me, I think that was probably the most impressive thing about the ship, is that you're being served this beautiful food, and the ocean is right there and it's rocketing past you at an extreme rate, and your wine glass isn't even moving. And it is just such an amazing sensation. I think that is testament really to the size and the engineering of the ship. It perfectly blends. Like, you're in the middle of the Atlantic, you're doing some insane speed, but the you can enjoy this finery. I really like, if it were high up and you would have a nice view, but I don't feel like it would give that same impact as being down, actually kind of in the ocean. You look out, we saw dolphins that were right there. It was such a fantastic experience.
Two reminiscences here. Or two comments. First is that QE2, when she was built, was one of the largest ships in the world, but Queen Mary 2 is twice her size. And I remember once on a very stormy transatlantic voyage on QE2. We were, I think, 2 days late arriving in New York because it was so bad.
Mm.
And a huge wave hit the side of the ship, and the dining room windows collapsed, and water poured in and threw the people at their tables over. Very, very quickly, the table was cleared and people ushered away, and wooden plugs were fixed where the glass would have been, and then everything carried on as normal.
Which restaurant was this in?
I think it was the first class restaurant, which was
Right.
the one that was lower down. So it's on the level of where it says Cunard. There.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah, we can see it. Columbia Restaurant, just a little bit forward of the funnel, lower down.
Yeah.
That's still pretty high up. Like that's
Oh,
the
it's still
ship's
pretty high
superstructure,
up.
just about.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Oof. Very cool.
Yeah.
What I love here, the revolving car lift. What a great addition.
Yeah, for the garage on board.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't carry cars on Queen Mary 2. The reason being the American authorities now require that the cars be completely purged of fuel. So they have to be purged and certificated, and you can't like drive on, therefore, like you could on QE2.
Shame.
Yeah. Yeah. So here she is setting off, 22nd of April, pouring rain, lovely Southampton day.
I was about to say.
Off to New York.
Beautiful British summer.
That's it. That's it.
Wow, it's a beautiful shot. Very atmospheric.
And here she is arriving 7th of May in New York to the huge reception. All the ships arriving and fireboat welcome.
Fantastic.
Wow. Arriving at the bottom end of Manhattan there, the Battery area where the World Trade Center was originally built, and the new Trade Center there in that lower Manhattan area.
Yeah, I suppose they were doing the prep work for the World Trade Center at this point.
Could have been 69, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, here we see that early configuration.
Beautiful.
Now, I've put this slide in because I wanted people to understand the operating rationale with the ship. So this is the 1970 transatlantic schedule. And let's take the first line as an example. So she leaves Southampton on the 8th of May, arrives in New York on the 13th, spends a whole day in New York, doesn't leave until the following day, arrives in Southampton on the 20th, then has 2 days in Southampton before her next voyage. So there's an awful lot of time where the ship's sitting around not earning money. But that's the way it was always done. And one of the big problems with QE2, and we'll see more of it later, is that she was originally designed to have 4 boilers. 3 of them would be in steam at any one time. So one would always be out of use, undergoing maintenance. So you could cycle them in and out of maintenance. Just having 3 boilers, 1 boiler was deleted as an economy measure.
Yep.
So the only time they had to do work on the boilers was during these stop time in New York and Southampton.
Wow, very short. Last time we talked about the kind of logistics that goes into schedules like these. So we were mentioning, or you mentioned that the original Queen Mary lacked laundry. So they're landing and having to get rid of all this stuff. Has this changed by this point?
Yeah, QE2 had a full laundry.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep. So yeah, again, just big change, but she's becoming more and more recognizable as something that you would find at sea today, really, as like standard operating procedure, where the ship is quite independent.
Yeah, and that was mainly driven by wanting to send the ship on long cruises.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be able to do laundry and swap, because that's what the old queens did. They put one set of laundry ashore, and they had a second set that would be put on board, and then the next time they arrived, they would get the original set back washed.
It blows my mind. That is so much, so much laundry. Like, you make it sound like when you say set, I just picture a cupboard full, but it's actually a warehouse of stacked, like,
Yeah,
whites.
you think bed linen, towels, napkins, unbelievable
for
amount.
like 3,000 people. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. We had a very helpful comment from Tom Haifa, who said that he's identified the flag. He said that we saw on QE2. He said was the Upper Clyde Shipbuilders flag, which is of course a fact that only Thomas Haifa could know.
Yeah.
He says that also on QE2 at high speeds, her speed was noticeable from the public room on the quarter and upper decks. But of course, the most exhilarating view was from the cabin portholes, because of course you'd low down and seeing that water roaring past. A lot of people quite taken with her profile. People saying that as a beautiful profile for a ship. Brian says that he took one class steam cruises from New York to Southampton in August 1986 at the age of 8. So when your turbine fan blade was still very much in use at the time. That's almost like a badge of honor, isn't it? To take a steam transatlantic voyage. Not many people can boast about that nowadays, I think.
No. Well, in fact, that was very close to when the re-engineering, because it was 86, 87 it was done.
Yeah, I think he said it was the last voyage. Yeah, one of the last. So it must have been probably, sounds like it was the last.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Someone said, actually, I do have to talk about this. So there's two things going on. So someone said, Mike, I hear you'll be at the Queen Mary speaking and it's sold out. Really excited you'll be back in the States. So this April, for the anniversary of the sinking of Titanic, there's going to be a big event on board. James Pinker from Titanic Honor and Glory, he's a great friend of mine. He's going to be there. And the Titanic Honor and Glory team are doing their traditional yearly kind of like recreation of the Titanic sinking in real time. I'll be a guest, but I will not be on the ship. I'm going to be joining you all from Australia. So I'll be coming in through Zoom or whichever we use, but I'll be weighing in where I can. But yeah, I won't be on the Queen Mary in April, but you absolutely should tune in to watch our live stream on the Titanic Honor and Glory channel. And for those of you who've already snapped up tickets to get onto Queen Mary, enjoy, because I think that's going to be a fantastic program. There's some very interesting speakers and artists. The very talented illustrator Greg DiNapoli, he'll be aboard. Quite a few interesting folks. So have a great time, those of you who are going. I'll be tuning in all the way from over here in Australia, as far away from the fun as possible. as is tradition. But yeah, I will be over in the States this summer. Yes, Stephen, you're talking aboard Queen Mary on the 185th anniversary crossing. Chris Frame is speaking aboard Queen Mary 2 as well. Chris is a very gifted historian and author. He's written many books with his wife, Rochelle. So those of you interested, come along. I will be there on holiday, so you'll see me in a Hawaiian shirt, not doing any speaking. I will be listening intently from the audience. So very, very exciting. Some cool things coming up this year. But yeah, guys, keep an eye out, because I think April for the Titanic anniversary is going to be a very, very big month. So we've got some exciting things planned. Now, I think we should get back to the QE2, because obviously now she's in service and some interesting things will probably start to happen from about the 26th of August 1971. That's just a guess. That's just an estimate.
Well, the big issue was that with the big anticipation of QE2 coming into service, that first season she was very successful, and for most of the second season, the 1970 season, she was, but costs were rapidly increasing to the point where she started to make a loss. And at that time, Trafalgar House, which were a big company in the UK, they put in a hostile bid for Cunard, and they did a hostile takeover, basically forced Sir Basil Smallpiece out, took control of the company, and then very rapidly assessed what needed to be done to keep QE2 in service. And they immediately withdrew Carmania and Franconia. They saw them as completely hopeless. They introduced the Cunard Adventurer and Ambassador, which were ships that were already under construction, which they acquired. They were rather too small, so there was a second pair of ships that they acquired in 76, 77, which was the Princess and the Countess. But it was the work that they did on QE2 to keep her going that we're going to look at now, because they made radical changes to QE2, and it's largely defines the Cunard that we have today. Very much. So they decided to spend 2 million on a refit, and you think the ship's only 3 years old at this stage, and 2 million is a huge amount of money. But they added 10 balcony suites in that forward sports court. The double up room was sacrificed and built into a shopping arcade, and where the shops had been, which we'll see in a minute, they built further cabins. The nightclub, the 736 Club that we saw earlier, that futuristic nightclub, became the Queen's Grill with a dedicated galley. There was an art gallery, which became the reading room and ballroom. But most significantly, the lookout bar that we saw, that first class area, that was removed and became a kitchen or galley to serve the Britannia restaurant. And the tourist class library was converted into a casino. So these were quite radical changes. The Queen's Grill was a big departure, where passengers spending the highest fares in those balcony cabins and the other top grade first class cabins were assigned to eat in the Queen's Grill. It would be a few more years before another level was introduced, the Princess Grill. But
so the lookout bar was removed. So are you saying that so that was at the forward superstructure, right, below the
that lounge was stripped out and rebuilt as a galley? Because you remember that slide we showed, it was right ahead of that Britannia restaurant.
Yeah.
And the problem was that the escalator service from the galley below led to rather poor service in Britannia. So they desperately needed to increase service. And that's why they had that other galley.
Because it was an unpopular room. Anyway, the lookout. It's just so insane to me, given now, you were concentrating so many important public rooms forward, looking out over the forward superstructure at the bow, that by this point on QE2, that is all crew accommodation and now a galley, which is ultimately like the best real estate on the ship.
Yeah, but
that's amazing.
As we said, QE2 did pitch a lot.
Right.
And certainly Queen Mary 2 doesn't pitch anything like QE2 does.
Yep, understood. Wow.
So here's the prefabricated suites being lifted on board. They were built and lifted on during a refit. And we see here the upper level or the promenade deck and the upper level of the double room. So the double up with the world, and we see the original shops. So they were all stripped out, and extra cabins were built where the shops are there, and that space, that's the original shops. So they were removed, and the space there adjacent to the well became the new shopping arcade, which remained to the ship's final withdrawal.
Wow. Promenade deck shops. Yep.
Yep. So these are the cabins they built within that shopping area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then this was the upper level of the double room. So this was double up, and you can see the boat deck there through the windows.
Yeah, you just make out a davit.
So that's where the shops ended up.
Mm-hmm.
So this is upper deck. You've got the double down room there, and the library that was converted into a casino is the library there on the upper part of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
At the top there.
Mm.
And that was the original tourist library. It was a very attractive area, but obviously there's no revenue from a library, whereas there are from slot machines and the casino. Yeah. So you remember that, or you got to realize that this was in 1971. This is before the fuel crisis. So if they hadn't have done this in 71, there's no way QE2 could have remained profitable in a few years' time when fuel oil prices skyrocketed.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, great foresight. Ultimately,
Trafalgar House, they did a fantastic job and the two main people there was the chairman and chief executive of Trafalgar, Sir Nigel Brokes, who was quite a colourful personality, really got on well with Her Majesty the Queen. Really patriotic. And then his sidekick that actually ran Cunard was Matthews, Lord Matthews.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So here she is after the suites have been added forward. Yeah, they're not that discernible here, so she hasn't changed that much. But gradually, as the years progressed, she would become more and more top-heavy as facilities and more top hamper was added. A bit like us all as we get older.
Someone made a comment earlier saying that it looked like I put on a bit of weight. So I turned 30 a couple of weeks ago, so I'm feeling it.
You got a long way to go, Mike.
I'm working on it.
So there are many incidents in the early years of QE2. There was a bomb threat where the army had to be parachuted aboard to check the ship in mid-Atlantic, and you see the parachutes there. There was a nasty fire in the boiler room on one occasion, which you see the blackened aft end of the funnel. And that caused this part of the funnel to actually become quite rippled and distorted. And that lasted right through her service and is still on board now. Because when the ship was re-engined, that cowl in there that you see all the blackened part, that was actually reused in the new funnel.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. Great bit of trivia. Love that.
And then in 1977, the iconic Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary suites were added forward, surrounding the mast. These being the most expensive cabins on the ship.
So this has been, obviously, the suites that were installed have proved successful, and Trafalgar House is thinking, or Cunard are thinking, we can add to this and increase profitability by adding more?
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Further passengers for the Queen's Grill experience. yeah, really expensive to occupy those cabins.
Possibly more so than any other ship. The QE2 became, in many ways, I think, like a real hodgepodge of style and everything because they were just constantly adding to it and changing it.
That's right. Yeah,
Whereas really the Queen Mary of the 30s hadn't changed a lot by the time she was withdrawn from service. I mean, there were obviously some changes, but you weren't having, aside from the engineers' accommodation, whole pieces of superstructure added at a time.
yeah.
This is
Post-war, there was very little done to the Queen Mary.
mm,
A lot of the changes occurred immediately after the war, but then from then on, very little was done.
amazing.
Yeah. So the big event in the ship's life, of course, was the Falklands campaign in the 1980s, 1982, when she was called up to become a troop ship to take the British Army down to the Falklands. And you see here that the aft windscreens have been removed to facilitate fitting a helipad. And up forward, over the hold there's another helipad been built. But the government were really, really worried about putting the ship in harm's way. And so she only sailed to St. Georgia. She didn't sail to the main Falkland Islands. And she offloaded the troops off St. Georgia. And it was Canberra that was pushed to go right into San Carlos water there. And when Canberra came back, she had a large banner that they erected on her side. Canberra cruises where QE2 refuses, which I thought was a great thing. But no, QE2 did great service taking the troops. And I actually was down at Southampton to watch her departure.
Wow.
And she left, sailed out of Southampton. It was on the news that the British Army is coming and everything. What we didn't know was that she only had one of the 3 boilers serviceable, and that as soon as she got out past the horizon or dipped over the horizon, she dropped anchor and they had to spend a couple of days to fix the other boilers. Otherwise, she wouldn't have got down to the Falklands.
Yikes. Wow. This is
But
also a great shot. So I was just going to say, because you can actually see the huge apartment block that's essentially been erected behind the radar mast.
Yeah,
that's a great shot.
That's it. They're the big suite cabins. Wow. Yeah, and in when she was re-engined, the space between those cabins and the funnel would be taken up by another block.
So yeah, gradually getting heavier at the top.
Yeah. So here is the big crane in Southampton erecting the flight pad for the helicopters up forward.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the work that needed to be done around the swimming pool at the aft end of the ship, the structural work needed to support the helipad.
And obviously doing this with a mind to then take it down eventually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the big thing here is that the main structural weight is being taken inside the swimming pool tank. And of course, the swimming pool tank was specifically designed to take the weight of the water when it was a swimming pool. So it was the ideal place to put the structure for the helipad.
Brilliant. Very clever.
And here the Gurkhas boarding the ship. And off she goes. And I'm somewhere in that crowd watching her sail off.
Wow. Yeah, truly a historic moment. It's unusual in many ways, because you would think that obviously they needed to get a lot of men somewhere at very short notice, relatively speaking. But of course, nowadays, the Navy has, dedicated, vessels like landing craft and things like that. It seems unusual to, even as late as 1982, be kind of doing a repurposing of a
troop ship.
civilian liner
Yeah.
in the same way that they
Yeah.
had in the Boer War, and it's it's very interesting that I guess they wouldn't do that nowadays. I would imagine that would be if they had to get a lot of men somewhere quick. Like, maybe this is a sensitive topic, and feel free to not answer the question.
Well, the thing is that there was no airfield that you could use,
right?
So the only way you could get there was by ship.
Like, is there a world in which QM2 could, at short notice, be requisitioned as a troop ship?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Wow, that would be interesting.
Absolutely.
Ooh,
Yeah.
QM2 in dazzle camouflage would be very interesting. We've painted it green. Now we're going for the dazzle.
Yeah, no, well, like the Olympic was.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Amazing. So yeah, really historic stuff. Oh, this is a great shot. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's a Sea King helicopter on the Forecastle helipad.
You wouldn't want to be using that in big seas.
No.
And there she is.
And here she is at St. Georgia unloading troops.
Amazing.
And then upon her return, she was greeted by Royal Yacht Britannia with the Queen Mother on board. The Queen Mother took the salute as QE2 steamed back to Southampton.
Fantastic.
And then Cunard, when she was refitted, and obviously she was refitted at government expense, they did two things. They painted the funnel completely red for the first time. That was seen as a sort of patriotic thing post-Falklands. But they also had this light grey hull colour, which, so fine. The modern day passenger ships are mostly white, so why not have the light grey? Well, the thing is, QE2, she had two small bow thrusters. She had no thrusters at the stern, and she required several tugs every time she sailed or arrived in port. And of course, the tugs in New York, they have rubber fenders that they tend to push the ships about. So very quickly, this light coloured hull became streaked with the rubber of the tyres that were used to push the ship, and it began to look terrible very, very quickly. So it only lasted a few months before she was repainted. And we haven't mentioned here that the colour is not black, it's a charcoal grey, a very dark grey. And that was something else that Gardner did, subtly change the colour of the hull from the original black.
Was that so that it would appear kind of lighter in photograph, or it looks different in certain conditions, right?
Yeah, that's it. That was it.
Wow.
And so here she is restored with the dark charcoal grey hull, but retaining the red funnel.
Yeah. I know Cunard, when she was first built, were trying to break away from tradition, and the white funnel obviously did that, but there's something so
iconic,
compelling. Yeah, it looks so good with that scheme. What is going on just aft, where the boats end? It seems, are those two?
She had two huge tenders, super tenders, and they're the davits.
Yep.
Or those tenders. They weren't a success because they were taken off after a short time as well.
Gee, they look like the davits from Britannic, like the gantry. Yeah. It's massive.
Yeah. And then Trafalgar House, constantly upgrading the ship, decided to fit a magrodome at the aft end. But unlike the Oceanic, where the different panels used to run fore and aft, on QE2, the panels ran port and starboard, so it would open in the middle, and they would fold under the deck at the side of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Oh, and the tenders we already covered.
Tenders were removed
Yeah.
in '94. Yeah,
Yep.
I know. Wasn't that
Very interesting?
so? That was added, and we see
Mm.
here the original deck, and then the deck with the magrodome on top. And the idea of this was that it would be used like for afternoon tea and as a sort of beginnings of a Lido restaurant.
Mm.
Now, there were two major problems here. One was the normal vibration in this area was absolutely unbelievable. And with the ship pitching, with the stern rising in and out, as the propellers re-entered the water, the vibration was absolutely unbelievable. And things would just roll off the table very quickly. And then the other problem was that the magrodome, which is based on a sort of rail mechanism, used to jump off the rails regularly and jam, and was far too heavy for them to deal with on board. So they would need the cranes back in Southampton to lift the magrodome back on its rails.
Yep.
So it wasn't a particular success. And you can see also at the end of the swimming pool, above the structure, those circles, that sort of vents for the air conditioning to come through. And the air conditioning in that area was very, very poor as well. So it was always very hot and clammy.
Yeah,
in there.
these
So,
rooms often turn into like a greenhouse kind of effect, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
So it was a good idea, but unfortunately, it didn't really work in that situation.
But it's interesting because QE2 is a ship designed for a different era, really, even though it's only been a little over maybe like 10, 15 years of service. It's like, she was designed in the 60s when the previous generation of liner was the Queen Mary, and the Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And now with this kind of Lido area, this is very much what you'd find on a ship now, but of course they're designed and built with these things already. You've got your enclosed pool, typically like amidships, as on Queen Mary 2 and Aurora, and then you've got exposed pools aft, which works really well. And but it's interesting that they're trying to put all these new kind of like revolutionary in some ways, things that we now accept on cruise ships on a ship that was in many ways, even though she was groundbreaking for her time, she still has the profile in some ways of an older ship, but she's still in my opinion, a ship from a different era. It's very interesting. I love that kind of mixing and matching and trying to see what works.
But they were continuously spending money on the ship and trying to keep as the premier passenger ship in the world.
Fantastic. Well, and it pays. I mean, it pays to upkeep. Goodness knows, and very timely as well. Very timely additions. So is this is the same space?
This is the same space. Yeah.
Yeah, you can see the air conditioning vents up top right. It looks comfy.
Yep. Although it should be a bit blurred to show the vibration.
The ashtray is moving across the table.
So we've said about the big problem with the boilers. QE2 at this time was becoming very, very unreliable, had constant breakdowns, and it was basically because she really did need that fourth boiler with 3 in steam. And I should also say Trafalgar House also put the ship on the schedule that we see today, where the ship would come in at 7 in the morning and sail the same day in the afternoon, because they eliminated the days in port where basically the ship wasn't earning any money. And because of that, they couldn't do maintenance on the boilers, and very rapidly the boilers began to fail, and they had constant problems. So they had to decide what they were going to do. And yeah, with only 10 hours in port, as we've said, for the 5-day
Wow.
transatlantics, you just needed all 3 of those boilers running.
So that time in port over the course of, think about it, 35, so like 40, 50 years has gone from days to a day to 10 hours. That is
10 hours. That's
remarkable.
Yep. So the existing machinery plant, being a steam plant, was now very expensive to operate. And they concluded that if she couldn't be re-engined with a much more fuel-efficient plant, then they would have to sell the ship, and that she would probably be sold for scrap. Now, at this time, QE2 was burning about 500 tons of fuel a day, which was half that the other queens consumed. So she was very efficient compared to them. Carried the same number of passengers, more or less, but in much more modern accommodations. But they had to come up with an idea and do drastic surgery on the ship. Yeah.
So she's already like, sorry, I was just gonna say, it's like
Yep.
she seems to be, these times are so uncertain that the ship is constantly dodging existential threats where their Trafalgar House is doing their best to keep this thing relevant in this very rapid fire changing world that she now finds herself in. Very, very clever business maneuvering by Cunard and Trafalgar House on this.
And so the plan was to rip out the steam plant and actually remove it through the funnel hatch. So take the funnel off. The hole that was left would be used as the means of removing all the steam plant that was cut up in situ. And then 9 large diesel engines and 2 massive electric propulsion motors were dropped in through the hole. And the ship would have controllable pitch 5-bladed propellers, but they also had these grim wheels, which by the man who invented them, I think it was Otto Grimm. And the idea of those was that as the propeller span, the energy that was thrown off of the propeller would be captured by these sort of windmills and would give additional thrust. And we see them in a moment in a picture.
Right.
So these are the turbines being demolished, and you can see the individual blades. And as I say, there's one of those blades behind my shoulder there on that wood plaque. So this is the foundations. You see one of the diesels there installed. 9 in total were installed in the ship, and all they would do was produce electricity, and it would be the electricity that would turn the propulsion motors and also provide the electricity for the hotel side of the ship.
Brilliant.
And here she is at Lloyd Werft. You see the funnel has been removed and is parked there, and there's the Venerable Canberra also undergoing a refit there at the same time. Same yard that did the Norway conversion. So they were very well attuned to doing these massive refits.
Yep. What a great shot. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And then these are the diesel engines, and you see how big they are from the man standing beside it. Absolutely massive. 9 of them.
9. That is remarkable.
And these are the largest for a commercial ship. I don't know about military, but commercial, these propulsion motors, 45 megawatts each. So, yeah, very, very high power to drive the twin screws.
Wow.
And here we have the new 5-bladed propeller, and you see these controllable pitch propellers have a very high skew. So the top of each blade is elongated, and that reduces the pressure pulses hitting the hull. It's when you have a propeller blade like a hand, where you've got a very small amount of area at the top, it's that throws off the pressure that hits the hull and creates the vibration. But by spreading the forces out across the top of the blade, it reduces those significantly. The only problem is that you cannot reverse these blades, because the blades just break off. So the way you reverse is by twisting the blade round, and that's the controllable pitch part of the mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
But you see this sort of windmill behind that. The idea is that the lower part of those windmills catches the thrust from the main propeller, spins the windmill, and the tips of the blades, which are what longer than the main propeller, throws off a bit more thrust. Now, the problem was that the marketing director of Cunard, Bernard Crisp, on the sea trials in the North Sea, said to the yard, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to see how fast the ship can go astern?" So the ship went astern at over 20 knots. And on the way back to Southampton, there was some strange vibrations. And so they sent a diver down, and they found that a lot of these windmill blades had actually broken off because they weren't designed to go astern at 20 knots. And so she had to do a few voyages with them attached, but then she had to go into dry dock to have them removed. And then they had to make new propellers, because these propellers were designed to work efficiently with these turbine blades. And without the blades, they were no longer optimum. So they had to have a new set of propellers made and then fitted again. So it was a very costly exercise.
Wow. And 20 knots astern is about as fast as many cruise ships go forward. So that's a pretty impressive,
that's
pretty
right.
impressive job.
And of course, one of the consequences of the refit was that the slim uptake that originally was just the exhaust for the 3 boilers suddenly has to accommodate the exhaust from 9 diesel engines. And so you see here the greatly expanded funnel to cope with that. And this slide actually shows that dimpled casing there that was from that fire.
Yeah, you can see it. You can see the damage. That's funny.
Yeah.
Was it just they so they kept the funnel to the side and they just added onto it? Is that
bigger
right?
bit in the middle.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, why not? It worked. I always liked this funnel. I always thought the beefier funnel kind of
it gave both are good. Yeah. And of course, this is what she looked like at sea. This is a picture I took from the Queen Victoria when we did a tandem crossing in 2008.
Great photo.
Yeah. So the opportunity was made to update the accommodation. There were new deck houses aft for shops. The double down bar was reformed into an early yacht club. The Britannia Grill was added, where the mid-range cabins now had this Britannia Grill for one sitting dining, and more balcony cabins were added. And then further on in the ship's career, part of the Britannia restaurant was taken out of service and rebuilt as the Crystal Bar. And then a bigger yacht club was built. The Magradome was removed. and a new permanent Lido restaurant was added in its place.
Mm-hmm.
So here we see the original part of the theatre bar, and then we see it transformed into the Golden Lion pub. And I think earlier I said this was the chart room, and I meant Golden Lion.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the theatre bar became the Golden Lion, and it was the midship bar that became the chart room.
Mm-hmm. And now these are all like standard on Cunard.
Yeah,
Ships.
absolutely. So the original midship bar, which was this dark suede and leather bar, was transformed into the iconic chart room.
Very beautiful. It still has a lot of the same kind of tone to it, though. That kind of moody.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like
And
it.
the piano was an original from the Queen Mary.
Oh, cool. Great.
Now, the Queen's room, hideous furniture replaced the original. And again, this didn't last long. And then the Grand Lounge, the completely transformed Bannenberg's design was swept away. Staircase was taken out, and this new horseshoe staircase added up with an enlarged stage. But they soon found that didn't work because people used to drop things down onto the band people and the entertainers, especially the kids on board. And with this view, you see the shopping arcade there that was originally that double up area.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the small yacht club, which took the place of the double down bar at the aft end of the double room.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the original form, the yacht club, and then it was greatly expanded when the superstructure was extended further aft.
Mm.
And the library, remaining library, was transformed from this configuration to the configuration that we all remember on board.
One of the finest libraries available at the time, jammed with maritime history, right? Wasn't it just absolutely full of the classics?
The one thing that seating was limited there, and I remember on one cruise with some former work colleagues, we were I was still working with Carnival, and there are a whole group of us traveling, but one of my colleagues from the border country went into the library, wanted to sit down and read a book, and couldn't find a seat. And my mother was sitting there, and he said to her, "Shouldn't you be in the laundry with the other women?" And I must admit, he got 2 barrels worth.
He picked the wrong person to say that to.
Absolutely, absolutely.
R.I.P. that
So
man.
we still laugh about that to this day.
And he hasn't been seen since. Yeah, they that model looks like Aquitania.
I think it was Aquitania, yeah, from what I remember.
Uh-huh.
Because Mauritania model was in the lobby outside the restaurant.
Great. So what's funny is, even though she was made to break away from this traditional, in many ways, Cunard heritage, she ends up kind of almost becoming a time capsule.
Yep, there was a refit done where they brought on all the heritage trials and that, because they wanted to compete with the new cruise ships and the new lines that were had no heritage. And of course, the one thing Cunard had was the heritage.
Mm.
So the idea was to flood the ship with memorabilia, models, menus, knickknacks, to give that identity, to set them apart from the other cruise ships.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pendulum swings now with Queen Anne. It's going the other way now.
It's going the other way.
Right.
Yeah. So these are two photographs showing the stern of the ship on the left with the magrodome installed, but in the open position. And then when that was taken away, the arrangement of the decks after the refit.
Mm-hmm.
So you see,
So
quite.
the pool that was in that Lido area was removed. Is that right?
That was removed,
Yep.
and that all became the Lido restaurant.
Very interesting.
And
nice.
the new yacht club at the aft
Cool.
end, which was a much larger space than the original.
In the background, is it stretched canvas? It almost looks like ship sails.
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
billowing.
It was done to represent sails.
Cool, beautiful
of a yacht.
Very nice.
Yep. And then everything was going well until the 1990s, when sadly Trafalgar ran into problems and was bought by Caverna. And they had no interest in Cunard. They just wanted the construction business, cementation. And so Cunard was identified as non-core and put up for sale. And nobody really wanted it because at this stage, Caverna didn't want to invest in QE2. And she ran down very quickly. And we didn't really know what was going to happen. And there were rumours that the Prudential Insurance Company would buy it. But out the blue, and I must admit, I had no inkling at all this was going to happen. In May 98, Carnival stepped in and bought it. And of course, a lot of the, not inspiration, but the emphasis on this came from the movie Titanic, where so many people started to wanting to do a transatlantic crossing that QE2 sailings became more popular. And suddenly Cunard appeared to be a better bid. And so Carnival stepped in and bought it.
Remarkable turn of events, really, that
no
one could have seen coming. Wow.
But it I must say, the foresight of Mickey Harrison and Howard Frank, without them, Cunard would not have been bought. And Cunard invested in the ship. This was one of the later refits, showing the Queen's Room. Still looking very elegant.
Still with this. So really, the columns are unchanged. The ceiling is unchanged.
The columns are unchanged. The ceiling's unchanged. The Queen's bust is there at the forward end.
Yep.
The Columbia restaurant had now been renamed Coronia, and this is you notice, being the first class restaurant, it still had the entrance where you would walk down the steps to it, where you could show off your finery, first class tradition. And I sort of copied that idea, obviously, on the Britannia restaurant for Queen Mary II, the grand entrance that you could do.
I like doing the double grand entrance, which is where you go in the wrong way by accident up top and then go down the stairs and then go down. So you kind of get both.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is really funny seeing kind of a return to, again, like wrought ironwork and wood paneling and wood columns and things, which I think her original designers would have been screaming about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And here's the Mauritania model outside the restaurant.
That's not the builder's model, right? Was that made? Do you know if it was made specifically for the ship?
I don't know where it came from. Actually, it was installed when they did the whole heritage thing with the ship.
Wow.
And then, of course, Queen Mary II came about and entered service in 2004, took over the transatlantic run. and QE2 thereafter became a dedicated cruise ship. Still immensely popular. Yeah. And then Queen Victoria followed, and then afterwards Queen Elizabeth. And then, of course, QE2 was nearly 40 years old at that stage, and ships can't go on forever. The big problem is the hull may be sound, and you have to keep that obviously in good condition throughout the life of a ship. So QE2 had constant repairs for cracking and everything. But the big problem is the machinery on board, the air conditioning plant and the sewage system, the lifts. As they begin to wear out, you cannot get spare parts because companies don't keep inventory for equipment that's 40 years old. And so you either have to make spare parts yourself, or you have to change the machinery for new. And it becomes more and more the point where you're spending more money on maintenance than is warranted by the profits from the ship. And so out of the blue, Dubai offered to buy the ship. And so it was announced that the ship would leave service in October, November 2008, and would become a hotel in Dubai. So here we are in January 2008. I'm on Queen Victoria, and we're doing a tandem crossing in January of that year. So it's QE2's last around the world cruise. And we...
I was going to say, it looks like that's an old passenger ship berthed astern of QE2. Do you remember what that was?
It's one of the Royal Vikings, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the stern was
one of the, 4 Royal Vikings. So they may have been with Saga by then. No, Fred Olsen by then. I can't remember actually, but I think it's one of those ships. So yes, it is. You can see there, it's one of the Fred Olsen Royal Vikings.
Right.
So we're steaming past the ship. She's at the Queen Elizabeth terminal, and she would follow us out. And then mid-Atlantic, it was being January, stormy mid-Atlantic, and you see the ship on her element. My word, did she dance around? Well, we were dancing around as well, but it's quite dramatic.
Amazing.
It just shows you, and though the seas there don't look that rough.
No. But I suppose it's that big wave form, the distance between waves that can get you. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. So that pitching we were talking about.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so that's really it. The ship left service, ended up in Dubai. They were going to completely strip the ship. There was going to be a new funnel built of glass, which was going to be a penthouse. But by the time the ship arrived in Dubai, there had been the financial downturn of 2008, and there was no money to do anything. And so the ship was left. They did have designs on putting the ship back into service, and they started a contract with MAN to recondition the diesel engines. And then midway through that, there was a dispute, and MAN walked off the job, and the engines were left dismantled and very quickly became corroded in the humid air of Dubai, and were basically ruined. And so that fell through. And it wasn't until think 2018, wasn't it, Mike? Something like
Mm.
that. She opened as the hotel with very little done, and they've been working through the ship in a piecemeal fashion, gradually rebuilding the ship and configuring it as a hotel out in Dubai.
I think the feedback that I've got from people who've been aboard is that the interiors, like a lot of these rooms now, are kind of unrecognizable. That they've completely redone quite a few of them, and the ship's lost a bit of its
Yeah,
service
yeah. Well, I
charm.
spoke to the guy that was running it a few years ago, and he said the big problem they had is that they've got to compete with all the Swiss hotels in Dubai,
Yeah,
and the ship, as she arrived in Dubai, just didn't have that wow factor that they needed.
yeah.
But a lot of the materials taken from the ship are now in a museum that's in the terminal where she's berthed.
Great. Yeah, so there's obviously been some real thought given to how they can preserve this heritage, but she's a ship that's dodged existential threats through her whole career,
Yeah,
and has
absolutely.
dodged
No,
another one. You know,
yeah,
it's she's
yeah,
still
yeah.
around.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and you know, better that she's doing that than being scrapped.
Or sunk as a reef.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
As much as we love
So,
the diving community. um, amazing.
so it's rather longer than I anticipated, but
That's because I kept interrupting.
no, it's.
No, it's just
But I
so
hope it's been
interesting.
interesting anyway.
It's been fascinating because it's just there's so much to it. It's hard, I think, to talk about. This could have easily been two parts because you've got so many different angles to this. You've got the design and construction of an ocean liner at a time when ocean liners were dying out. You've got this extraordinary career, and then this epilogue, which is that she is still around. Um, I know it's getting awfully late for you, Stephen, so I'll just wrap up by just reading out a couple of the comments that we missed.
Sure.
American Loyalist asked a little while back, what do you two think happens when it's time for the Queen Mary to be a retiree? So Queen Mary 2 has been built, as I understand it, with a pretty decent lifespan of something like 30, 40 years, was it?
Yeah, at least the structural side was 40 years. But again, it will be the systems and machinery on board that will be the thing that determines. But as far as I'm aware, Carnival Stroke Cunard intend the ship remaining for a long time yet.
That is good
And
to know.
certainly, obviously, I hope that when the time does come, she finds some suitable resting place.
Yeah, brilliant. Thomas Heifer has left a few interesting comments because, of course, he's QE2 mad. He said, and I mean that in the best possible way, of course. He said the late 1994 Project Lifestyle refit made her a lot more cohesive, the QE2, internally in the public areas, as I remember, and can still mostly be seen in Dubai today. So that's good. So they're still holding up. He said that the Heritage Trail, also added in late 1994, made her a major Cunard museum until the retirement. Plus, one member of the crew's main job, Thomas, also called Thomas, was to give tours of it. I remember his voice booming along the passageways and the stairs.
Yeah, I remember Thomas. Yes,
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Of course, QM2, she's got the Heritage Trail installed now, which is kind of really like a self-guided tour if you feel like doing it, which is great. Which is in a very cool part of the ship where I guess I think it starts there, but you know, where it's really low down on, I think it's like decks 3 or something like that, where you've got those windows that look out right over the ocean.
Well, in fact, it extends throughout the whole ship because a lot of the stairway lobbies have panels with the Heritage Trail. So
that's why I remember which deck and stairwell I'm on. It's actually really useful as a navigational aid because I will remember if I'm, deck 4 aft, for example, there'll be a panel there about the Carpathia. So if I've had like a couple of wines, I'll be able to just look for Carpathia and it will guide me home. So Carpathia saving passengers to this day. Thomas said that the ship that we spotted is the Boudica. My dad was on QE2
Okay.
for this tandem with my auntie and took a stern to stern photo. QV was pitching just as much as QE2.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, absolutely.
Stephen, what an absolutely fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for running us through it and giving us really the extended cut, because I know you do this on ships and to colleges.
I
And it's
do
like an
this on the
hour.
ship in an hour. That's
Yep.
right. Yep, yep, yep.
I somehow just woke up my phone and it thought I was talking to it, but I was actually talking to you. Technology is fantastic. That's yeah, we really appreciate it. I think it's been a really great look. I know really only a little about QE2, so it's just been fascinating. I hope the audience has enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I know it's quite late. You've earned a good rest. Hopefully we can get you back, because of course we've really talked our way up to the introduction of the Queen Mary 2, which is a story for another day.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be awesome. Well, look, everyone, thank you so much for watching tonight. We've had, we've been hovering around 400 odd viewers, and of course people will be catching up in the next couple of days. So everyone, thank you very much for tuning in. Stephen, did you have a last comment?
Yeah, no, just to thank everybody. And QE2 were very instrumental in my life, as I say, visiting it in when I was 9 years old. And yeah, no, really fond memories of traveling on it. Did the last transatlantic, which was fantastic. And yeah, really good. So it's been
jealous.
Great to share those memories and everything with everybody. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Until next time, we'll see you again, Stephen, and everybody else, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again. Now I have to smoothly transition to the standby screen so the nice outro music plays. Goodbye, everybody. Have a good night, and we'll speak again.
Bye.